The neon sign flickered, casting an eerie red glow across the cracked pavement. Vacancy, it promised. But as I pulled my rig into the nearly empty parking lot of the Pine Grove Motel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I should have kept driving. 18 hours behind the wheel had taken their toll. My eyes burned, and the lines on the road had started to blur an hour ago. I knew I was pushing my limits, but this run paid double, and I needed the cash. Now, staring at the dilapidated 2-story motel, I was beginning to wonder if the money was worth it. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the distant hum of the highway. The lot was empty, save for a beat-up Ford pickup and an ancient Buick with a crumpled fender. No other trucks. Unusual for a place like this, but maybe I'd lucked out. A quiet night's sleep sounded like heaven. Grabbing my overnight bag, I hauled myself out of the cab. The summer air hit me like a wet blanket, thick and oppressive even at this late hour. Crickets chirped in the overgrown grass bordering the lot, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. The office was a small building separate from the main structure. A bell jingled as I pushed open the door, and the blast of Arctic air conditioning made me shiver. Behind a scratched plexiglass window sat a man who looked as old and worn as the motel itself. His rheumy eyes flickered up from a dog-eared paperback, regarding me with disinterest. "Need a room," I said, fishing out my wallet. He grunted, setting down his book. "Single?" I nodded. "45 cash, checkouts at 11. I slid 2 20s and a 5 under the window. He pushed back a key attached to a large plastic fob with the number 17 stamped on it. "Second floor, end of the walkway," he said, already reaching for his book again. "Vending machines are busted, ice machine works, sometimes, Thanks," I muttered, pocketing the key. Back outside, I trudged up the metal stairs to the second floor. They creaked and groaned under my weight, and I found myself wondering when they'd last been inspected. Probably around the same time the rest of this place had seen better days. Room 17 was at the far end, just as the clerk had said. The key stuck in the lock, and I had to jiggle it before the tumblers finally gave way. The door swung open with a protesting squeal. The smell hit me first, musty and stale, with an underlying hint of cigarette smoke that decades of air fresheners had failed to mask. I flicked on the light switch, and a single bulb in a tarnished fixture sputtered to life, casting sickly yellow light across the room. It wasn't much, but I'd stayed in worse. A queen-sized bed dominated the space, its faded floral comforter having seen better days. A small dresser stood against one wall, topped by an ancient tube TV. In the corner, a rickety table and chair completed the sparse furnishings. I tossed my bag on the bed and headed for the bathroom. The fluorescent light buzzed and flickered before steadying, revealing chipped tiles and a rust-stained sink. But the toilet flushed, and when I turned the tap, the water ran clear. It would do. After a quick shower that never quite reached the right temperature, I changed into a clean t-shirt and sweats. The bed creaked as I sat down, springs protesting. I flicked on the TV, more for background noise than anything else, and was unsurprised to find only a handful of fuzzy channels. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew, I was jolting awake, disoriented. The TV was still on, bathing the room in a blue glow. I fumbled for my phone. 2:17 a.m. I'd been out for a couple of hours. That's when I noticed the silence. The TV was on, but there was no sound. Not from the speakers, not from outside. No distant traffic, no humming air conditioner, nothing. The silence pressed against my ears, making them ring. And then I heard it, a whisper, so faint I thought I might have imagined it. I held my breath, straining to listen. There it was again, coming from the wall behind the headboard, words I couldn't quite make out, spoken in a low, urgent tone. I sat up slowly, heart beginning to race. Was someone in the next room? The wall couldn't be that thin, could it? The whispering continued, rising and falling in cadence. It sounded like more than one voice now, a quiet conversation I couldn't quite hear. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, intending to press my ear to the wall. But as soon as my feet hit the carpet, the voices stopped. The silence returned, heavy and oppressive. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like minutes. Had I imagined it? Maybe it was just the tail end of a dream, my exhausted mind playing tricks on me. I was about to lie back down when I heard it, a soft scraping sound like fingernails dragging across wood. It was coming from the door. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the door, willing it to be my imagination. The scraping came again, more insistent this time. And then, slowly, the handle began to turn. I lunged for my bag, frantically digging for the small canister of pepper spray I always carried. My fingers closed around it just as I heard a soft click. The door began to open. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice sounding strangled and foreign to my own ears. The door stopped moving, left slightly ajar. Through the crack, I could see nothing but darkness. "I'm armed," I lied, hoping my voice didn't betray the tremor I felt. "I've called the police." Silence. The door didn't move. I stood there, pepper spray clutched in a white-knuckled grip, heartbeat thundering in my ears. Seconds ticked by, feeling like hours. And then so quietly I almost missed it, I heard a chuckle. Low and mirthless, it sent ice down my spine. The door slowly began to close. I lunged forward, slamming it shut and throwing the deadbolt. My hands shook as I fumbled with the flimsy chain lock for all the good it would do. Backing away from the door, I grabbed my phone. No signal. Of course, I was about to try for the landline when I heard it again. That soft, mocking laugh, this time from right outside my window. I whirled around. The curtains were drawn, but in the gap where they didn't quite meet, I caught a flash of movement. Something pale pressed against the glass for just a moment before vanishing. My back hit the wall. I was trapped. The door, the window, they were toying with me. Whatever was out there, it wasn't human. It couldn't be. The whispering started again, louder now. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, the walls, the ceiling, under the bed. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Hungry, eager. I had to get out. Grabbing my bag, I made for the door. I'd take my chances running to the truck. Better than being a sitting duck in here. My hand was on the doorknob when the power went out. The TV died with a soft pop, plunging the room into darkness. I froze, ears straining. The whispering had stopped. For a long moment there was nothing. No sound, no movement. Just the darkness and the pounding of my own heart. Then a sharp crack like a gunshot, but closer. The mirror. I spun around just in time to see the bathroom mirror explode outward in a shower of glass shards. I didn't think. I yanked open the door and ran. The walkway was pitch black. I stumbled, nearly falling down the stairs. Behind me, I heard doors slamming open, one after another. Footsteps, too many to count, pounding after me. I took the stairs 3 at a time, my bag banging against my leg. I hit the parking lot at a dead sprint, fishing for my keys. The lot was empty. My truck was gone. Panic clawed at my throat. This wasn't possible. None of this was possible. I spun around, searching desperately for any sign of my rig. That's when I saw them. Figures. Dozens of them lined up along the second-floor walkway. They were wrong proportions distorted, limbs too long. In the faint starlight, I could see their eyes gleaming. A scream built in my chest, but before it could escape, hands grabbed me from behind. Cold, impossibly strong fingers dug into my arms. I thrashed and kicked, but it was like fighting stone. As they dragged me back toward the motel, I caught a glimpse of the office. Through the window, I saw the old clerk. He was watching, a small smile on his face. As our eyes met, he raised his hand in a little wave. Then he turned back to his book. The last thing I saw before they pulled me into the darkness was the neon sign. It flickered once, twice, then it went dark. The vacancy was filled. Story 2. The headlights behind me hadn't dimmed for the last 3 hours. At first I thought nothing of it, just another traveler on this lonely stretch of I-40. But as the miles rolled by and the sun dipped below the horizon, an uneasy feeling settled in my gut. I'm John, a long-haul trucker with 15 years under my belt. I've seen my fair share of weird stuff on the road, but nothing quite like this. It was supposed to be a routine run from Albuquerque to Oklahoma City, the kind of trip I could do with my eyes closed. Not that I would, mind you. Safety first and all that. The day had started normally enough. I'd loaded up my rig with a shipment of electronics, done my usual checks, and hit the road just as the first rays of sunlight were painting the Sandia Mountains a brilliant orange. The cab of my Peterbilt was my second home, the hum of the engine a comforting lullaby as I settled in for the long haul. It wasn't until I was about an hour east of Amarillo that I first noticed the car. A nondescript sedan, dark in color, though I couldn't make out the exact shade in my mirrors. It was keeping pace about a quarter-mile back, maintaining that distance with uncanny precision. I didn't think much of it at first. Plenty of folks like to tuck in behind a big rig, using us as a windbreak to save on fuel. But as the hours ticked by and we crossed into Oklahoma, that car remained a constant presence in my rear view. The two-way crackled to life, breaking the monotony of the engine's drone. "Hey, Johnny boy, you seeing this sunset? It's a real beauty tonight." It was Mike, another trucker I often crossed paths with on this route. I keyed the mic, grateful for the distraction. "Sure is, Mike. Hey, you got eyes on a dark sedan about a quarter-mile back." There was a pause before Mike's voice came back, tinged with curiosity. "Negative, Johnny. Road's clear behind you far as I can see. Why you asking?" A chill ran down my spine. I glanced in my mirrors again, and sure enough, the car was still there, headlights burning bright in the gathering dusk. "No reason," I lied, not wanting to sound paranoid. "Just thought I recognized it. Catch you down the road, Mike." Mutsi. I tried to shake off the growing unease, cranking up the radio and singing along to some old Johnny Cash tunes. But my eyes kept darting to the mirrors, watching that unwavering pair of headlights. As night fully settled in, the car's behavior began to change. It would fall back, almost disappearing from view, only to suddenly reappear, closing the distance between us. Then it would match my speed again, as if nothing had happened. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, a cold sweat beading on my forehead, despite the cool air blasting from the AC. I considered calling the highway patrol, but what would I say? I'm being followed by a car that's doing nothing illegal? The green glow of my dashboard clock read 9:47 p.m. when I saw the sign for an upcoming rest stop. My bladder was screaming for relief, and I figured it was as good a chance as any to see if I could shake my tail. I signaled and began to decelerate, guiding my rig onto the exit ramp. In my mirrors, I saw the car hesitate for a moment before following suit. The rest stop was nearly deserted, just a couple of cars and another semi parked in the lot. I pulled into a spot far from the other vehicles, my heart pounding in my chest. As I set the brake and killed the engine, I saw the sedan slowly cruise into the lot. For a long moment, I sat there in the darkness of my cab, watching. The car circled the lot once before pulling into a spot about 50 yards away. Its headlights switched off, but the engine remained running. I debated what to do. Part of me wanted to just start up and get back on the road, but I knew I couldn't drive safely if I didn't take care of business. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box and opened the door. The cool night air hit me like a slap, helping to clear some of the fog of fear from my mind. I climbed down from the cab, my boots crunching on the gravel. The lot was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic from the highway. I kept my eyes on the sedan as I made my way towards the restroom building. In the dim light of the parking lot lamps, I could now see it was a dark blue color, possibly a Ford or Chevy. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside. Just as I reached the door of the restroom, I heard a car door open. My heart leapt into my throat as I spun around, fumbling to switch on my flashlight. The beam illuminated a figure emerging from the sedan. Tall, dressed in dark clothes, their face hidden by the shadow of a baseball cap. They took a step in my direction, then another. I backed up against the restroom door, my hand frantically searching for the handle. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice sounding strangled and foreign to my own ears. The figure stopped, raising their hands slowly. "Whoa! Easy there, buddy!" a man's voice called out. "I didn't mean to scare you. I just need some help." I didn't lower my flashlight. "What kind of help?" I demanded, still pressing myself against the door. The man took off his cap, revealing a young face, probably in his late 20s. He ran a hand through his short brown hair, looking embarrassed. "This is going to sound crazy, but I think I'm being followed." I blinked, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins, making it hard to process his words. "What?" He glanced nervously over his shoulder before continuing. "I noticed a truck behind me a few hours ago. At first, I didn't think anything of it, but it's been there ever since, always staying the same distance back. I thought maybe if I followed you in here, I could lose them." The absurdity of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I lowered my flashlight, letting out a shaky laugh. "You've been following me because you thought I was following you?" The young man's face scrunched up in confusion. "Following you? No, I've been behind a semi-truck, a big red Peterbilt." I gestured towards my rig with my flashlight. You mean that Peterbilt, His eyes widened as he took in my truck. Oh, shit, he muttered. I'm so sorry, man. I didn't realize. I was so focused on the truck behind me, I didn't even notice. As the tension began to drain from my body, it was replaced by a mix of relief and lingering concern. Wait, you said there was a truck following you? He nodded vigorously. Yeah, it's been there for hours. I thought for sure it would follow me in here. I walked over to the edge of the parking lot, peering out at the highway. There was no sign of any vehicles slowing down or taking the exit. Well, it's not here now, I said, turning back to the young man. What's your name, kid? Alex, he replied, still looking sheepish. Look, I'm really sorry about this. I guess I just got paranoid, you know? I sighed, feeling the last of my own fear dissipate. It's all right, Alex. The road can do funny things to your mind sometimes. Why don't you come over to my truck and we'll figure this out? As we walked back to my rig, Alex filled me in on his story. He was driving cross-country to start a new job in Tennessee, and this was his first long solo road trip. The truck he'd seen had started following him just outside of Amarillo. All right, I said as we reached my truck. First things first, we need to call the highway patrol. Even if this truck isn't following you anymore, they should know about it. Alex nodded, relief visible on his face. Yeah, that's a good idea. I should have done that hours ago, but I was afraid they'd think I was crazy. I chuckled, patting him on the shoulder. Trust me, kid, they've heard crazier stories. Now let me just grab my phone from the cab. I climbed up and opened the door, reaching across to the passenger seat where I'd left my phone. As my hand closed around it, a flicker of movement in my side mirror caught my eye. A pair of headlights had just turned into the rest stop. I froze, watching as a large semi-truck, its trailer unmarked and its cab a nondescript white, pulled slowly into the lot. It came to a stop near the entrance, its engine idling. Hey, Alex, I called down, trying to keep my voice steady. That truck that was following you, what color was it? There was a pause before his shaky voice replied. It was white, a white cab with no markings on the trailer. I swallowed hard, my eyes locked on the truck at the entrance. I think you better get in the cab. Now. As Alex scrambled up into the passenger seat, I fired up the engine. The white truck hadn't moved, but I could feel eyes on us, watching, waiting. What do we do? Alex asked, his earlier bravado completely gone. I threw the truck into gear, my mind racing. We drive, and we don't stop until we hit the next town with a police station. As I pulled out of the parking spot, I saw the white truck's engine roar to life, its headlights blazing. In that moment, I knew the night was far from over, and our real journey was just beginning. Story 3. The city never sleeps, they say. But at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, it sure looks like it's trying. My bike tires hiss against the wet asphalt as I pedal through empty streets. The rhythm of my breathing the only sound breaking the eerie silence. I've been a food delivery cyclist for 6 months now, and I thought I'd seen it all. But tonight feels different. It starts with an order from the other side of town. Some guy craving tacos at an ungodly hour. Whatever, it's money in my pocket. I strap the insulated bag to my back and set off, Google Maps guiding me through a maze of dark alleys and deserted avenues. The first few miles are uneventful. A stray cat darts across my path. A lone taxi cruises by, its yellow paint garish under the sickly glow of streetlights. But as I turn onto Maple Street, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Something's off. I hear it before I see it, the low rumble of an engine out of place in the quiet night. Glancing over my shoulder, I spot a white van about half a block behind me. No big deal, right? Plenty of night owls in this city. But as I pick up my pace, so does the van. My heart rate quickens, matching the increased speed of my pedaling. I take a sharp right onto Oak Avenue, hoping to lose my shadow. For a blissful moment, silence returns, then the rumble again. The van reappears in my peripheral vision, closer this time. Sweat beads on my forehead despite the cool night air. This can't be a coincidence. I rack my brain trying to remember those self-defense tips my roommate's always going on about. Keys between the knuckles? Great if I wasn't gripping my handlebars for dear life. I veer left onto a narrow side street, then right again. My thighs burn with the effort, but fear is one hell of a motivator. I chance another look back. The street behind me is empty. Did I lose them? The relief is short-lived. As I round the next corner, my blood runs cold. There it is again. That damn white van idling at the intersection ahead. How? It's impossible. Unless they know these streets better than I do. The realization hits me like a punch to the gut. I'm not randomly being followed. This is planned. My mind races faster than my bike. Should I call the police? But what would I say? Help, there's a van. I can already imagine the dispatcher's bored voice telling me to call back if something actually happens. By then it might be too late. I consider ditching the delivery and heading home. But what if they follow me there? No, I need to stick to public areas. Safety in numbers, right? Except there are no numbers at this hour, just me, my bike, and whoever's in that van. The delivery address is only a few blocks away now. I decide to make a break for it. Head down, legs pumping, I fly down the street. The van's engine roars to life behind me. It's gaining, but I'm smaller, more agile. I cut through a park, tires skidding on the dewy grass. Emerging on the other side, I spot my destination up ahead. My heart leaps. Almost there. Just a few more. The hope dies in my throat as I skid to a stop. The building looms before me, dark and decrepit. Boarded-up windows gaze down like empty eye sockets. This can't be right. Who orders food to an abandoned building? With trembling fingers, I pull out my phone to double-check the address. The screen lights up my face, harsh in the darkness. It's correct, this is the place. But it's clearly been deserted for months, maybe years. The realization crashes over me like a wave of ice water. There is no delivery. There never was. It's a setup, and I've pedaled right into it. The van's headlights illuminate the street behind me, growing brighter by the second. I'm out of options and out of time. With shaking hands, I unclip the delivery bag and let it fall to the ground. Whatever happens next, I don't want to be weighed down. I push off, ready to make one last desperate sprint, when a voice cuts through the night. "Hey, where you going with my food?" I nearly fall off my bike in shock. A figure emerges from the shadows of the abandoned building. As he steps into the glow of a nearby streetlight, I see a middle-aged man with a scraggly beard and worn clothes. He eyes the bag on the ground, then looks at me with a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "I've been waiting for an hour, man. You just gonna leave it there?" Words fail me. I stare at him, then at the van that's now pulling up to the curb. The side door slides open, and out steps a woman. She's carrying a clipboard and wearing a vest with a logo I don't recognize. "Oh good, you're both here," she says, approaching us. We can get started. My mind reels, unable to process this bizarre turn of events. "Get started?" I manage to croak out. The woman nods, all business. "Yes, for the night patrol training. Didn't they tell you? We're doing a simulation to test response times for our new community watch program." It hits me all at once. The late-night order to a strange location, the van following me, the seemingly abandoned building. It wasn't a threat, it was a test. A test I spectacularly failed, might I add. The bearded man chuckles, apparently catching on quicker than I did. "Oh man, you should see your face right now, kid. You look like you've seen a ghost." I want to be relieved, I should be relieved. But as the adrenaline subsides, it's quickly replaced by a burning anger. "Are you kidding me?" I burst out. "Do you have any idea how terrifying that was? I thought I was about to be murdered. The woman at least has the decency to look somewhat abashed." "I'm sorry if it scared you. That wasn't our intention. We're trying to improve safety in the neighborhood, and part of that is understanding how people react in potentially dangerous situations." "By creating dangerous situations," I shoot back. "How is that helping anyone?" She opens her mouth to respond, but I'm not interested in hearing it. My legs feel like jelly as I climb back on my bike. "Keep the food," I mutter to the bearded man. I'm out of here. As I pedal away, I hear the woman calling after me, something about compensation for my time. I don't slow down. The whole situation feels wrong, leaving a sour taste in my mouth that has nothing to do with the tacos growing cold in the abandoned bag. It's nearly 3 a.m. by the time I make it back to my apartment. My roommate is still up, bathed in the blue light of his laptop screen. He looks up as I trudge in, taking in my sweaty, disheveled appearance. "Rough night?" he asks. I collapse onto our worn-out couch, feeling every one of those miles in my aching muscles. "You have no idea." For a moment, I consider telling him everything, about the van, the fear that gripped me, the bizarre training exercise. But looking at his concerned face, I realize I don't want to relive it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Just a long shift, I say instead. Think I'm going to call it quits on the late-night deliveries. He nods, turning back to his screen. Probably for the best. City gets weird after midnight. I let out a humorless chuckle. Yeah, I mutter. Weird. As I head to my room, my phone buzzes with a notification. It's the delivery app asking me to rate my experience. I stare at the screen for a long moment before turning the phone off and tossing it aside. Some experiences don't fit neatly into 5-star ratings. Some nights leave you questioning everything, your job, your city, your own judgment. And some deliveries, well, some deliveries never quite arrive at their intended destination. I flop onto my bed, not bothering to change out of my work clothes. As exhaustion pulls me under, one last thought flits through my mind. In a city that never sleeps, maybe it's time I started keeping different hours. Because the night might not be as dangerous as I feared, but it's certainly not as safe as I once believed. The next time that food delivery app lights up my phone in the wee hours, I think I'll let someone else take the ride. Some risks just aren't worth the tip. Story 4. The flashing blue and red lights pierced the fog, a warning beacon in the murky night. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I eased off the gas. A checkpoint at this hour? Something didn't feel right. I'd been on the road for hours, making the long haul from Chicago to my sister's place in rural Minnesota. It was just past 2 a.m., and this stretch of highway had been deserted for the last 100 miles. The fog had rolled in about an hour ago, thick enough that I'd had to slow to a crawl, straining to see the road ahead. Now, emerging from the mist like a mirage, stood a line of police cruisers, their lights casting eerie shadows across the wet asphalt. Orange cones funneled traffic, what little there was, into a single lane. A figure in a reflective vest waved a flashlight, directing me to stop. I rolled to a halt, my wipers squeaking across the windshield. The fog swirled around the car, and for a moment I could barely make out the officer approaching my window. My pulse quickened. I'd been through plenty of checkpoints before, but something about this one set my nerves on edge. The beam of a flashlight swept across my face as I lowered the window. Cold, damp air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of wet asphalt and something else, something metallic and unpleasant. "License and registration," a voice demanded. Male, gruff, no pleasantries. I squinted against the light, trying to make out the officer's face. All I could see was the outline of a hat and broad shoulders. "Sure thing, officer," I said, reaching for my wallet. "Mind if I ask what this is about? Bit late for a checkpoint, isn't it?" The flashlight dipped, and I caught a glimpse of a pale, angular face. The eyes that met mine were flat and cold. "Just a routine stop," he said. His tone suggested it was anything but. "We've had some incidents in the area." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the foggy night. I handed over my license and registration, noticing as I did that my hands were shaking slightly. The officer studied my documents for what felt like an eternity. In the rearview mirror, I could see another car pulling up behind me. The fog was so thick now that its headlights were just dim glows in the mist. "Where are you headed?" the officer asked, still not handing back my documents. "Visiting family in Minnesota," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "My sister just had a baby." He grunted, seeming uninterested. "Long drive. You been on the road a while?" I nodded. "Since about noon. Probably should have stopped for the night, but I was hoping to make it before morning." "Uh-huh." He finally lowered the flashlight, and I blinked, spots dancing in my vision. "Step out of the car, please." My heart skipped a beat. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Just need to ask you a few more questions. Step out of the car." Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, but what choice did I have? Refusing would only make things worse. Slowly, I unbuckled my seatbelt and opened the door. The fog seemed to press in around me as I stood. I could barely make out the other cruisers now, just vague shapes in the mist. The officer loomed over me, and I noticed for the first time how tall he was, well over 6 feet. "Pop the trunk," he said. "Look, officer," I started, my mouth dry. "I'm not sure what this is about, but I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just trying to get to my sister's." "The trunk," he repeated, cutting me off. "Open it." I hesitated, then reached back into the car for the trunk release. The latch clicked and the officer moved to the rear of the vehicle. I followed, my legs feeling like lead. He swept the flashlight beam across the contents of my trunk, a suitcase, some jumper cables, a few reusable grocery bags filled with baby gifts for my new nephew. "Planning a long stay?" he asked, prodding at the suitcase with the end of the flashlight. "A week or so," I replied. "Look, can you please tell me what this is about? I'm happy to cooperate, but this is starting to feel less like a routine stop." The officer turned to face me, and in the dim light I could finally see his face clearly. My blood ran cold. His skin was waxy, almost gray, with deep shadows under his eyes. But it was those eyes that terrified me. They were blank, devoid of any human warmth or emotion. "We've had reports," he said slowly, "of someone trafficking illegal goods through this area. Someone matching your description." My mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. "There must be some mistake," I stammered. "I'm just a software engineer visiting family. You can call my sister, she'll vouch for me." He ignored me, turning to wave over another officer. This one was shorter, stockier, but with the same unsettling pallor and dead eyes. "Check the car," the first officer ordered. "Thoroughly." The second officer nodded and moved to the passenger side. I watched in growing panic as he began methodically searching my vehicle, pulling out seat cushions and rifling through the glove compartment. "This is insane," I protested, my voice rising. "You can't do this without probable cause. I want to speak to your supervisor." The tall officer's hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. His fingers were ice cold even through my jacket. "You'll speak to who I tell you to speak to," he growled. His breath smelled wrong, not of coffee or cigarettes, but something sickly sweet and rotten. I tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. "Let go of me," I demanded, fear giving way to anger. "This is harassment. I know my rights." A thin smile spread across his face, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. "Rights?" he chuckled. "Oh, you have no idea what's happening here, do you?" The fog swirled around us, and I realized with growing horror that I could no longer see the other police cars. The checkpoint had vanished, leaving only this small bubble of light surrounded by impenetrable mist. "Nothing in the car," the stocky officer reported, slamming the passenger door. "Want me to check under the hood?" The tall one shook his head, still gripping my arm. "No need. I think we found what we're looking for." Ice flooded my veins. "What are you talking about? I haven't done anything." The officer leaned in close, his cold breath ghosting across my face. "It's not about what you've done," he whispered. "It's about what you are." I stared at him, uncomprehending. His eyes seemed to grow larger, darker, swallowing up the whites until they were nothing but bottomless pits. "Fresh meat," he hissed, his voice no longer human. "Young, strong, perfect." I screamed then, a primal sound of terror that tore from my throat. I wrenched my arm free and ran, blind panic driving me into the fog. Behind me I heard laughter, a horrible, chittering sound that no human throat could produce. Footsteps pounded after me, too fast, too many. The fog pressed in, disorienting me. I couldn't tell which way the road was, which way led to safety. My lungs burned as I ran, feet slipping on the wet ground. Suddenly the mist parted, and I found myself at the edge of a deep ravine. I skidded to a stop, nearly pitching over the edge. Far below I could hear the rush of water. "Nowhere left to run," a voice sing-songed behind me. I turned to see the officers, if that's what they truly were, emerging from the fog. Their forms seemed to ripple and shift, growing larger, more monstrous. "What do you want?" I gasped, backing up until my heels were at the edge of the cliff. The tall one grinned, his mouth now full of needle-sharp teeth. "We told you, we want you." They advanced slowly, savoring the moment. I looked from their twisted faces to the dark chasm behind me. The choice was clear. I turned and jumped. The wind rushed past me as I fell, the monster's howls of rage fading above. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for impact. Instead of jagged rocks or icy water, I hit something soft. My eyes flew open in confusion. I was in my car, slumped over the steering wheel. Daylight streamed through the windshield, and birds chirped in nearby trees. I sat up, heart pounding, looking wildly around. I was in a rest stop parking lot, my car the only vehicle in sight. The clock on the dash read 8:17 a.m. Had it all been a dream? Some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion? As my breathing slowed, I noticed something on the passenger seat. A small triangular patch of fabric torn and stained, the edge of a police badge. My hands shaking, I started the car. Whatever had happened, whatever those things were, I knew one thing for certain. I was getting as far away from this place as possible, and I was never driving this road again. Story 5. The beam of my flashlight danced across the forest floor, revealing a trail of disturbed leaves and broken twigs. Something or someone had come this way, and recently. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I ventured deeper into the woods, leaving the safety of my patrol car behind. I never could have imagined that responding to a simple call about an abandoned vehicle would lead me here to the threshold of a mystery that would haunt me for years to come. My name's Sarah Reeves, and I've been with the Highway Patrol for just over 5 years now. I thought I'd seen it all. Drunk drivers, horrific accidents, even the occasional high-speed chase. But nothing in my training had prepared me for what I was about to discover on that crisp autumn night. It had started as a routine call, the kind we get a dozen times a week. A passing motorist had reported an abandoned car on a remote stretch of Highway 16, about 30 miles outside of town. As I pulled up behind the vehicle, my cruiser's lights painting the scene in alternating flashes of red and blue, I immediately sensed something was off. The car, a late-model sedan, was parked at an odd angle, half on the shoulder and half in the rightmost lane. Both doors on the driver's side hung open as if someone had left in a hurry. I radioed in my position and stepped out of my cruiser, one hand resting instinctively on my holstered weapon. "Hello?" I called out, my voice seeming unnaturally loud in the still night air. "This is the Highway Patrol. Is anyone here?" Only the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze answered me. I approached the vehicle cautiously, my flashlight beam sweeping the interior. The keys were still in the ignition, and a cell phone lay face down on the passenger seat. In the back, a child's car seat was securely fastened, empty. My stomach tightened. Where was the driver? And God forbid, where was the child? I circled the vehicle, looking for any signs of an accident or foul play. That's when I noticed them. Strange markings on the ground beside the car. At first I thought they might be tire tracks, but as I crouched down for a closer look, I realized they were something else entirely. Long, parallel grooves scarred the earth, as if something heavy had been dragged from the road towards the tree line. Alongside these, I could make out footprints, at least 2 distinct sets, one large and one small. My pulse quickened as I followed the trail with my eyes to where it disappeared into the dense undergrowth. I should have waited for backup. Every instinct honed by years on the force screamed at me to return to my cruiser and call this in. But the thought of that empty car seat propelled me forward. If there was a child out there, lost or in danger, every second could count. Drawing my weapon, I plunged into the forest, following the mysterious trail. The thick canopy overhead blotted out what little moonlight there was, leaving me reliant on my flashlight to navigate the uneven terrain. Branches snagged at my uniform, and more than once I nearly lost my footing on the leaf-strewn ground. I'm not sure how long I walked. It could have been 10 minutes or an hour. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the oppressive darkness of the woods. But suddenly my light fell upon something that made me stop dead in my tracks. There, in a small clearing ahead, stood a ramshackle structure. Calling it a camp would have been generous. It looked more like a crude shelter cobbled together from discarded tarps, branches, and what appeared to be car parts. Scraps of metal glinted in my flashlight's beam, and I could make out the shape of a door, an actual car door, serving as an entrance to the makeshift dwelling. My heart pounded in my ears as I approached, weapon at the ready. "Hello?" I called out again, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. "This is the police. Is anyone in there?" A rustling sound from within the shelter froze me in place. Then slowly the car door creaked open. A face peered out at me, a man's face, gaunt and wild-eyed, his beard matted and unkempt. He blinked in the harsh glare of my flashlight, raising a hand to shield his eyes. "Please," he croaked, his voice hoarse as if from disuse. "Please help us." Before I could respond, a small figure darted out from behind him. A little girl, no more than 6 or 7 years old. She clung to the man's leg, her wide eyes fixed on me with a mixture of fear and hope. I lowered my weapon slightly, my mind reeling. "Sir, are you the owner of the vehicle abandoned on the highway?" He nodded slowly. "My daughter, she got sick. I didn't know what to do. The car, it just..." It stopped working. We've been out here for days." As he spoke, I took in more details of their appearance. Their clothes were dirty and torn, and both looked malnourished. The little girl's cheeks were flushed, and she shivered despite the mild temperature. "Why didn't you call for help?" I asked, gesturing back towards the road. "Your phone is still in the car." The man's face crumpled. "It died. I couldn't remember the way back. We just kept walking, trying to find help, but we got so turned around." He choked back a sob. "I thought we were going to die out here." I holstered my weapon and took a step closer, holding out a hand. "It's okay. You're safe now. I'm Officer Reeves, and I'm here to help." "Can you tell me your names?" "I'm Michael," the man said, his voice steadying slightly. "This is my daughter, Emily." Emily peered up at me, her small hand still clutching her father's pant leg. "Are you going to take us home?" she asked in a tiny voice. I felt my throat tighten with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to get you both home safe and sound." As I radioed for backup and medical assistance, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. The strange markings on the ground, the elaborate shelter, the car parts strewn about. It all seemed at odds with the simple tale of a broken-down vehicle and a lost family. But those were questions for later. Right now, my priority was getting Michael and Emily to safety. As we waited for help to arrive, I did my best to make them comfortable. I gave them water from my canteen and wrapped Emily in the emergency blanket from my cruiser's trunk. Michael's relief was palpable. He couldn't stop thanking me, his earlier wild-eyed look replaced by exhausted gratitude. It wasn't until the paramedics had arrived and were checking Emily over that Michael pulled me aside, his voice low and urgent. "Officer," he said, glancing nervously at the other first responders, "there's something you need to know. Something I saw out here in the woods." I leaned in, intrigued. "What is it, Michael?" He licked his lips, hesitating. "You'll think I'm crazy. Hell, maybe I am. Being out here alone for so long, it does things to your mind." "Try me," I said gently. "After what you've been through, I'd say you've earned the benefit of the doubt." Michael took a deep breath. "The first night we were out here, after the car broke down, I saw lights in the sky. Not stars, not planes. They were moving in ways that didn't make sense. And then..." He trailed off, his eyes distant. "And then?" I prompted. "Something landed," he whispered. "In the clearing where you found us. That's why I built the shelter. Not just to protect us from the elements, but to hide. To keep us safe from whatever it was that came out of that light." I felt a chill run down my spine, despite my skepticism. "Did you see what it was?" Michael shook his head. "Not clearly. It was dark and I was scared out of my mind, but I heard things at night. Movements in the woods. Sounds that no animals should make." He gripped my arm suddenly, his eyes boring into mine. "You have to believe me. There's something out there, something that doesn't belong in this world." Before I could respond, one of the paramedics called out, asking Michael to join them. He gave me one last pleading look before hurrying back to his daughter's side. As I watched the ambulance pull away, its lights flashing silently in the night, I found myself torn. The rational part of my mind wanted to dismiss Michael's story as the ramblings of a man pushed to his mental limits by a traumatic experience. But another part of me, a part I wasn't entirely comfortable acknowledging, couldn't shake the feeling that there was some truth to his words. I turned back to the forest, my flashlight beam probing the darkness between the trees. For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of movement, a flash of something that didn't belong. But when I blinked, it was gone. As I made my way back to my cruiser to begin the mountain of paperwork this incident would generate, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder one last time. The woods stood silent and still, revealing nothing of their secrets. But I knew one thing for certain. I would be back. There were questions that needed answering, mysteries that needed solving. And something told me that this lonely stretch of highway and the forest beyond held the key to it all. Little did I know this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the world and my place in it. Story 6. The moment I saw the tow truck driver's face, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. But by then it was already too late. It had started as just another boring Tuesday. I was driving home from my sister's place, taking the long route through the countryside because, well, why not? The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. It was the kind of view that made you glad to be alive. Then my car decided it had other plans. The first sign of trouble was a weird rattling noise coming from under the hood. I ignored it at first. Isn't that what we all do? But then the rattling turned into a high-pitched whine, and before I knew it, smoke was billowing out from under the hood. No, 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 I muttered, easing the car onto the shoulder of the road. The engine gave one last pathetic sputter before dying completely. Great, just great. I sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel, as if sheer willpower could bring my faithful Honda back to life. No such luck. With a sigh, I pulled out my phone. No signal, because of course not. Why make this easy? The sun had dipped below the horizon now, leaving behind a rapidly darkening sky. I glanced at my watch. 8:47 p.m. Not terribly late, but late enough to make me uneasy about being stranded on a lonely stretch of road. I popped the hood and got out, though I'm not sure why. I know about as much about cars as I do about quantum physics. Steam hissed angrily at me as I peered inside, trying to look like I knew what I was doing. After a few minutes of pointless staring, I slammed the hood shut in frustration. That's when I noticed the sign about a quarter-mile back. Pete's Towing, 24/7 service, next exit. Well, it wasn't ideal, but it was something. I locked up the car and started walking. The crickets were out in full force, their chorus almost deafening in the still evening air. Every so often, a car would zoom past, headlights briefly illuminating the road before plunging me back into twilight. By the time I reached the exit, my feet were aching and I was seriously regretting my choice of shoes. High heels and impromptu hikes don't mix, let me tell you. The tow company's office was just off the exit ramp, a small, somewhat dilapidated building with a neon open sign flickering in the window. The bell above the door jingled as I entered. The office was empty, save for a bored-looking teenager behind the counter, more interested in his phone than in potential customers. "Excuse me," I said, approaching the counter. "My car broke down about a mile up the highway. I need a tow." The kid barely glanced up. "Pete's out on a call. Be back in about an hour." An hour? I bit back a groan. "Is there anyone else who can help?" He shrugged, eyes still glued to his phone. "You can try Cal's Towing. They're about 20 miles south." I was about to resign myself to a long wait when the door jingled again. A man walked in, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. He was tall, probably in his late 40s, with the kind of muscular build you get from manual labor, not a gym. "Everything okay here, Tommy?" he asked the kid at the counter. "Lady needs a tow," Tommy replied, still not looking up. The man turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "That so? Well, you're in luck. I just finished up my last job. Where's your car?" I hesitated. Something about this guy set off alarm bells in my head, but what choice did I have? "About a mile north on the highway," I said. "Are you Pete?" He chuckled. "Nah, Pete's my boss. Name's Jim. I'm the night shift guy." He held out his hand and I shook it reluctantly. His grip was too tight, held for just a second too long. "I'm Sarah," I said, pulling my hand back. "So can you help me?" "Sure thing, Sarah. Let's head out." As we walked to his truck, I pulled out my phone again. Still no signal. Jim noticed. "Phone trouble? You can use the one in my truck if you need to call someone." I shook my head. "It's fine. I'll try again later." The tow truck was old and beat up, with Pete's Towing painted on the side in fading letters. As Jim started the engine, I noticed a coil of rope and a roll of duct tape on the passenger seat between us. My stomach did a little flip. "Mind moving those?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Not much room here." Jim glanced at the items, then at me. For a split second, I saw something flash in his eyes, something cold, calculating. Then it was gone, replaced by that same not quite right smile. "Oh, sure thing," he said, tossing them in the back. "Force of habit, you know. Never know when you might need to tie something down." We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the rumble of the truck's engine and the crackle of the radio. I kept my eyes on the road, hyper-aware of every move Jim made. "So, Sarah," he said finally, "what brings you out this way? Not many folks on this road this time of night." Visiting my sister, I replied, keeping it vague. Took the scenic route home. He nodded. Sister, huh? She expecting you? The question sent a chill down my spine. Yeah, I lied. I was supposed to be there by now. She's probably wondering where I am. Jim just hummed in response, his eyes never leaving the road. We were getting close to where I'd left my car. Any minute now we'd see it, except we didn't. We passed the spot where I was sure I'd broken down, but there was no sign of my Honda. I think we missed it, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Can we turn around? Jim shook his head. Nah, it's up ahead a bit. Roads all look the same out here at night, easy to get confused. But I wasn't confused. I knew exactly where I'd left my car, and it wasn't here. My heart was pounding now, blood rushing in my ears. This was wrong. All of it. Actually, I said, my voice shaking slightly, I think I made a mistake. I'm sure my car is back there. Why don't you just drop me off and I'll walk back? Jim's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Now, why would you want to do that, Sarah? It's dark out. Not safe for a pretty lady like you to be walking alone. The truck was picking up speed now. I glanced at the door handle, wondering if I could tuck and roll at 60 miles per hour, probably not without breaking something. I really think we should turn around, I insisted, unable to keep the fear out of my voice now. Jim's face hardened. I'm afraid I can't do that, Sarah. We've got places to be. In that moment, I knew I was in serious trouble. This wasn't a tow truck driver. This was something else, something dangerous. My mind raced, trying to figure out a way out of this nightmare. That's when I saw it. A glimmer of hope in the form of flashing lights in the distance. A police car parked on the shoulder up ahead. Jim saw it too. I felt the truck slow down. Please, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Please just let me out. For a long moment, Jim said nothing. The police car was getting closer. I could see the officer now, talking to someone in a pulled-over car. This was my chance. Just as we were about to pass the police car, I made my move. I grabbed the steering wheel, jerking it hard to the right. The truck swerved, tires screeching. Jim swore, fighting for control. We spun once, twice, before coming to a stop mere feet from the police car. Everything after that was a blur. The officer running towards us, gun drawn. Jim trying to speed away but stalling the engine. Me tumbling out of the passenger side, scraping my knees on the asphalt but too amped up on adrenaline to feel it. Later, at the police station, I learned the truth. Jim wasn't a tow truck driver at all. He was a convicted felon with a history of assault and kidnapping. He'd been posing as a tow truck driver for weeks, preying on stranded motorists. My car? Probably towed away by an accomplice while Jim distracted me at the office. As I sat there, wrapped in a shock blanket and sipping lukewarm coffee, I couldn't stop shaking. Not just from the near miss, but from the realization of how quickly an ordinary day can turn into your worst nightmare. How the simple act of trusting a stranger can go so terribly wrong. The detective taking my statement paused, giving me a sympathetic look. You did good, he said. A lot of people freeze up in situations like that. You kept your head and you took action when you had the chance. That's why you're here talking to me instead of... He trailed off, but I could fill in the blank. I nodded, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. I was alive. I was safe. But I knew that this night would stay with me for a long, long time. Every dark road, every broken-down car, every offer of help from a stranger, they would all carry the echo of this night, this terror, this near miss. As I finally left the station, the sun was starting to rise. A new day. I stood there for a moment, letting the warm light wash over me. I was different now. Warier, yes, but also stronger. I had looked into the face of true danger, and I had survived. Whatever came next, I knew I could handle it. But first I was going to call my sister. And then I was going to take the busiest, most well-lit route home I could find. Some scenic routes, I decided, were best left untaken. Story 7. The harsh fluorescent lights of the truck stop bathroom did nothing to soften my reflection. Dark circles under my eyes, hair a tangled mess. I looked exactly how I felt after 12 hours on the road. But it was the fear I saw in my own gaze that made me pause. I knew I shouldn't have stopped here. Now I just needed to figure out how to leave. It had started as a simple road trip, A chance to clear my head after a messy breakup, just me and the open road. I'd always wanted to drive cross-country, and with nothing holding me back, it seemed like the perfect time. 3 days in, I was loving the freedom, the endless horizon stretching out before me. Then my GPS decided to take me on a shortcut. I should have known better. The sun was setting, and the lonely 2-lane highway hadn't seen another car in miles. But the fuel gauge was dipping dangerously low, and when I saw the faded sign for Big Rig Oasis Gas Food 24/7, I felt a wave of relief. As I pulled into the nearly empty lot, that relief quickly faded. The place looked like it hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint since the 70s. A flickering neon sign buzzed erratically, and half the overhead lights were out. But beggars can't be choosers, and my options were limited. I pulled up to a pump, the gravel crunching under my tires. The station was deserted save for 3 big rigs parked off to the side, their engines idling softly in the growing darkness. As I got out to fill up, I felt eyes on me. Glancing towards the trucks, I saw movement behind tinted windows. A chill ran down my spine. Keeping my head down, I focused on filling my tank as quickly as possible. The pump was old, the numbers clicking by slowly. Each second felt like an eternity. That's when I heard the truck doors open. Heavy boots hit gravel. Low voices, male, grew louder as they approached. Well, well, what do we have here? I turned, my heart racing. 3 men stood there, all easily over 6 feet tall and built like linebackers. The one who'd spoken, a bearded giant in a faded flannel shirt, grinned at me. His teeth were stained yellow. "Looks like we got ourselves some company, boys," he said, elbowing one of his companions. "Don't see many pretty little things like this out here, do we?" I forced a tight smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just passing through, almost done here." The bearded man took a step closer. I could smell stale cigarette smoke and something stronger whiskey, maybe. "No need to rush off," he said. "Why don't you come have a drink with us? We got a nice little setup in my cab." "Thanks, but I really need to get back on the road," I said, turning back to the pump. My hands were shaking as I replaced the nozzle. A meaty hand landed on my shoulder, spinning me around. The bearded man's smile was gone. "Didn't anyone teach you it's rude to turn your back on someone who's talking to you?" I shrugged off his hand, anger momentarily overriding my fear. "And didn't anyone teach you to keep your hands to yourself?" His eyes narrowed. "Oh, we got a feisty one here. I like that. Makes it more fun when they fight a little." The other 2 men chuckled, moving to flank me. I was trapped between them and my car. "Look," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "I don't want any trouble. Just let me pay for my gas and I'll be on my way." The bearded man pretended to consider this. I don't think so. See, we don't get much entertainment out here. And you? Well, you look like you could be real entertaining." My mind raced, searching for a way out. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement near the station's small convenience store. Someone was watching from inside. "Help, maybe?" "Fine," I said, making a show of sighing in defeat. "Let me just grab my purse. Can't party without cash, right?" The men exchanged grins. "Smart girl," the bearded one said. "Go on then, but don't try anything stupid." I turned to my car, moving slowly. As I reached for the door handle, I glanced towards the store again. The watcher was gone. My heart sank. Just as my fingers touched the handle, a new voice rang out. "Everything all right over here?" We all turned. A woman stood there, early 50s maybe, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a baggy flannel shirt and work boots, and her eyes were sharp as she surveyed the scene. "None of your business, lady," the bearded man growled. "Keep walking." The woman's eyes narrowed. "I own this place, so it damn well is my business, and I don't recall inviting low-life lot lizards like you onto my property." One of the other men took a threatening step forward. "Watch your mouth, bitch. You don't know who you're dealing with." In one smooth motion, the woman reached behind her back and produced a shotgun. The sound of it being cocked echoed in the night air. "Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with," she said, her voice ice cold. "Bottom-feeding scum who think they can prey on lone travelers. Well, not at my station. You've got 10 seconds to get in your rigs and drive away before I start removing kneecaps." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the bearded man spat on the ground. "This ain't over," he snarled. 9 seconds, the woman replied, raising the shotgun. They backed away slowly, then turned and jogged towards their trucks. Engines roared to life, and within moments they were pulling out of the lot, their taillights soon swallowed by the darkness. I sagged against my car, the adrenaline leaving me shaky. The woman approached, lowering the shotgun. "You all right, honey?" she asked, her tone gentler now. I nodded, not trusting my voice just yet. "Come on inside," she said. "Let's get you something to drink and you can calm down a bit." I hesitated, still wary after what had just happened. She seemed to read my mind. "Name's Carol," she said. "Been running this place for 30 years. I've seen every kind of trouble you can imagine, and I've dealt with it all. You're safe now." Something in her steady gaze convinced me. I followed her into the small store, which was cleaner and better maintained than the outside suggested. She locked the door behind us and flipped the sign to "Closed." "Have a seat," she said, gesturing to a small table in the corner. "I'll make us some coffee." As the rich aroma of brewing coffee filled the air, I felt myself starting to relax. Carol brought over 2 steaming mugs and sat across from me. "Thank you," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up." Carol's face darkened. "I've got a pretty good idea. Those bastards have been causing trouble up and down this stretch for months now. Police are useless out here. By the time they show up, it's too late." I shuddered, realizing how close I'd come to being another statistic. "So you just took matters into your own hands?" She shrugged. "Someone has to. World's a dangerous place, especially for women traveling alone. I do what I can to even the odds a bit." We sat in silence for a moment, sipping our coffee. Finally, I asked the question that had been nagging at me. "The shotgun, was it loaded?" Carol's lips quirked in a small smile. "What do you think?" I considered this. I think it doesn't matter. They believed it was, and that was enough." She nodded approvingly. "Smart girl, sometimes the threat of violence is more effective than violence itself. But make no mistake, if they had called my bluff, I would have followed through." The matter-of-fact way she said it sent a chill down my spine. I realized I was in the presence of a woman who had seen and done things I could scarcely imagine. "Now," Carol said, leaning back in her chair. "Where are you headed?" I told her about my impromptu road trip, leaving out the details about the breakup. She listened attentively, then pulled out a map. "You'll want to avoid this stretch of highway for the next 100 miles or so," she said, tracing a route with her finger. "Take this detour instead. It'll add an hour to your drive, but it's safer." She proceeded to mark several spots on the map, safe places to stop, reliable mechanics, towns to avoid after dark. It was a crash course in survival for solo female travelers, learned through years of hard-won experience. As she walked me back to my car an hour later, I felt both sobered and strangely empowered. The night's events had shaken me, yes, but they had also opened my eyes to a world I had been naive about. "Remember," Carol said as I got into my car, "trust your instincts. If a place feels wrong, it probably is. Don't be afraid to turn around and leave." I nodded, starting the engine. "I won't forget. And Carol, thank you for everything." She waved as I pulled away, a solitary figure standing guard in the pool of light outside her truck stop. In my rearview mirror, I watched her grow smaller until the darkness swallowed her up. The open road stretched out before me once more, but now I saw it with new eyes. There was freedom here, yes, but also danger. And somewhere in between, there were people like Carol, small points of light in the vastness. I drove on, wiser, warier, but undefeated. The journey continued. Story 8. The stench hit me first, a rancid odor that made my eyes water and my stomach churn. I've smelled some nasty things in my line of work, but this was different. This was wrong. As I lifted the lid of the dumpster, I had no idea that I was about to stumble upon something that would change my life forever and put me squarely in the crosshairs of a killer. My name's Jake, and I've been a garbage truck worker for the better part of a decade. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills and keeps me in shape. Most days, it's a predictable routine. Wake up at the crack of dawn, make my rounds, and try not to gag at some of the things people throw away. But that Tuesday morning in October was anything but routine. I remember it was unseasonably warm for autumn, the kind of day that makes you think global warming might be more than just talk. The sun was just starting to peek over the rooftops of the quiet suburban neighborhood as I maneuvered my truck down Maple Street. It was a nice area, All manicured lawns and two-story houses with white picket fences. The kind of place where you'd expect to find more recycling bins than trash cans. I was about halfway down the street when I spotted it. A large, industrial-sized dumpster parked in front of number 37. It wasn't unusual to see these during home renovations or spring cleaning, but something about this one made me pause. Maybe it was the way it seemed slightly out of place in the otherwise pristine neighborhood, or maybe it was just a gut feeling. Either way, I decided to check it out. Hopping down from the cab, I made my way over to the dumpster. That's when the smell hit me, growing stronger with each step. I've dealt with my fair share of rotting food and dirty diapers, but this was different. This smell had a metallic tang to it, like copper pennies left out in the sun. I hesitated for a moment, my hand on the lid. Part of me wanted to just walk away, to pretend I hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. But curiosity got the better of me, as it often does. With a deep breath, I heaved the lid open. At first, all I saw was a jumble of trash bags and broken furniture. Nothing too out of the ordinary. But as I leaned in for a closer look, something caught my eye. A flash of white peeking out from beneath a torn garbage bag. My heart started racing as I carefully moved the bag aside. There, partially hidden by the debris, was a human hand, pale, lifeless, with perfectly manicured nails painted a bright red. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. This kind of thing didn't happen in neighborhoods like this, not to guys like me. I was just a garbage man, for Christ's sake. As the initial shock wore off, my training kicked in. I knew I needed to call the police to report what I'd found. But as I reached for my phone, movement in my peripheral vision made me freeze. Slowly, I turned my head towards the house. There, in a second-floor window, I saw a face. A man, middle-aged with graying hair, was staring right at me. Our eyes locked for a moment, and I saw something in his gaze that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't fear or surprise, it was cold, calculating interest. Before I could react, the face disappeared from the window. I heard the faint sound of a door opening inside the house. Panic surged through me. I sprinted back to my truck, fumbling with my keys as I climbed into the cab. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. Just as the engine roared to life, I saw the front door of the house open. The man from the window stepped out onto the porch. He was wearing a bathrobe, looking for all the world like any other suburban resident starting his day. But the look in his eyes was anything but ordinary. I threw the truck into gear and peeled away from the curb, my heart pounding in my chest. In the rearview mirror, I saw the man calmly walking towards the dumpster, as if he was just taking out the morning trash. Once I was a few blocks away, I pulled over and called 911 with trembling fingers. The dispatcher's calm voice was a stark contrast to the chaos in my head as I tried to explain what I'd found and where. The next few hours passed in a blur. Police cars swarmed the neighborhood, lights flashing and sirens wailing. I gave my statement over and over to uniformed officers, to detectives in plain clothes, to a woman who introduced herself as a forensic psychologist. They found the body, of course, not just one but three, all women, all with bright red nail polish. The quiet neighborhood was turned upside down, residents watching in shock from behind curtained windows as body bags were carried out of the house at number 37. The man, Dr. Robert Chambers, I later learned, was taken into custody without incident. A respected psychiatrist, a pillar of the community. No one could believe it. No one except me who had seen the coldness in his eyes. In the days that followed, my face was all over the news. "Local hero garbage man uncovers serial killer," the headlines screamed. Reporters camped out on my front lawn, shoving microphones in my face every time I stepped outside. My phone rang off the hook with interview requests and even a few movie deals. But at night, when the cameras were gone and the house was quiet, I couldn't shake the image of that pale hand among the trash, of the cold eyes watching me from the window. I'd close my eyes and see Dr. Chambers walking calmly towards the dumpster, as if daring me to challenge him. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Every creak in the house, every shadow in the corner sent my heart racing. I started checking the locks obsessively, peering out the windows at all hours. The rational part of my brain knew that Chambers was behind bars, that he couldn't hurt me. But fear isn't rational. A week after the discovery, I received a letter. No return address, just my name written in an elegant script. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words that made my blood run cold. You should have kept driving. I took the letter to the police, of course. They assured me it was probably just a sick prank, that Chambers was securely locked away, but they assigned a patrol car to drive by my house regularly, just in case. Weeks turned into months. The media frenzy died down, and life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. But for me, there was no going back to normal. Every dumpster, every trash can became a potential crime scene. I jumped at shadows and flinched at sudden noises. My co-workers started giving me worried looks, whispering when they thought I couldn't hear. I tried to move on, to put it behind me. I even started seeing a therapist, ironically enough, but every time I thought I was making progress, something would trigger the memories. A flash of red nail polish at the grocery store, the metallic taste of a penny, the sound of a garbage truck in the distance. 6 months after that fateful morning, I received another letter. This time, there were only 3 words. I'm still watching. I stared at the paper, my hands shaking. It was impossible. Chambers was in prison, awaiting trial. He couldn't be watching me, and yet... I rushed to the window, scanning the street outside. Nothing seemed out of place, but suddenly every parked car looked suspicious, every closed curtain hiding potential threats. That's when I realized the truth that had been nagging at me all along. It wasn't just Chambers I was afraid of. It was the knowledge that evil could hide in plain sight, that monsters could masquerade as pillars of the community. That realization changed everything. I quit my job the next day, packed up my things and moved across the country. Some might call it running away, but I prefer to think of it as a fresh start, a chance to reclaim my life from the shadow of that October morning. But even now, years later, I can't help but glance over my shoulder from time to time. I still check the locks twice before bed, still hesitate before opening any kind of container. Because once you've lifted the lid on true evil, you can never quite close it again. And sometimes in my dreams, I'm back on that quiet street. The dumpster looms before me, its contents hidden but somehow threatening. And as I reach for the lid, I hear a voice whisper from behind me, "You should have kept driving, Jake. You really should have kept driving." Story 9? I've been driving trucks for 20 years and I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing could have prepared me for the night I picked up a hitchhiker on Route 66. It wasn't the act of picking him up that was unusual. It was everything that came after. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the highway into a treacherous mirror of shimmering asphalt. My wipers were working overtime, barely keeping up with the downpour. It was the kind of night that makes you question why you ever chose this job in the first place. I'd been on the road for 14 hours straight, pushing the limits of what was legal, and probably safe. But when you've got a deadline and a family to feed, sometimes you make compromises you're not proud of. The coffee in my thermos had gone cold hours ago, but I sipped it anyway, grimacing at the bitter taste. That's when I saw him, a lone figure on the side of the road, thumb out, looking more like a drowned rat than a person. In 2 decades of long-haul driving, I'd passed hundreds of hitchhikers without a second thought. It was safer that way, but something made me slow down this time. Maybe it was the weather, or maybe I was just tired of my own company. I eased my rig onto the shoulder, the air brakes hissing in protest. The figure ran towards the truck, and I leaned over to unlock the passenger door. As it swung open, I got my first good look at my new riding companion. He was younger than I expected, probably in his early 20s. Soaking wet, with shaggy brown hair plastered to his forehead and clothes that hung off him like he'd lost a lot of weight recently. But it was his eyes that caught my attention, wide and darting around nervously, like he expected trouble to jump out at any moment. "Thanks, mister," he said, clambering into the cab. I thought I was going to drown out there. I nodded, putting the truck in gear. "Where you headed?" "Anywhere but here," he replied with a nervous laugh. "How far you going?" "Got a delivery in Albuquerque," I said. "That work for you?" He nodded enthusiastically. "Perfect." We rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the rumble of the engine and the steady beat of rain on the roof. I snuck glances at him when I could. He was fidgety, constantly looking in the side mirror as if checking to see if we were being followed. "So," I said, trying to break the tension. "What's your name, kid?" He hesitated for a moment. "Jack," he finally said. "My name's Jack." I didn't believe him for a second, but I let it slide. We all have our secrets. "I'm Tom," I said. You hungry, Jack? I've got some sandwiches in the cooler behind you." As he reached for the cooler, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, peeking out from under his sleeve, was what looked like a hospital bracelet. He caught me looking and quickly pulled his sleeve down, but it was too late. I'd seen it. An uncomfortable silence fell over the cab. I kept my eyes on the road, mind racing. Who was this kid really? And what was he running from? "Look," he said suddenly, his voice tight with tension. "I can explain." But before he could finish, a news alert crackled over the radio, cutting through the static. "Police are searching for an escaped patient from Meadowbrook Psychiatric Hospital. The patient, described as a white male in his early 20s with brown hair, is considered unstable and potentially dangerous. If spotted, do not approach. Contact local authorities immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel Jack, or whatever his real name was, tense up beside me. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. In that moment, I realized I was alone on a dark, rainy highway with a potentially dangerous mental patient. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why don't you tell me what I should think, then?" He took a deep breath. I'm not dangerous. They had no right to keep me there. I had to get out." "And why's that?" I asked, trying to buy time as I considered my options. The next town was at least an hour away, no way to call for help without him noticing. "Because," he said, his voice rising, "they're the ones who are crazy. They don't understand. None of them do." I nodded slowly, keeping my movements calm and deliberate. "What don't they understand, Jack?" His eyes were wild now, darting around the cab. "The signals, the patterns, it's all connected, don't you see? The government, the aliens, the mind control rays, it's all part of their plan." "Great, just great. I'd picked up a full-blown conspiracy theorist with delusions. I dealt with some characters in my time, but this was way out of my league." "That sounds complicated," I said, trying to keep him talking while I figured out what to do. "Must be tough, being the only one who knows the truth." He nodded vigorously. "Exactly, that's why they locked me up. They couldn't handle the truth. But I showed them. I got out, and now I'm going to expose it all." As he talked, his movements became more agitated. I noticed his hand twitching towards his pocket. Was he armed? I couldn't take that chance. "Listen, Jack," I said, keeping my voice low and calm. "I believe you, I do. But maybe we should pull over for a bit, get some rest. It's been a long night for both of us." He shook his head. "No, we can't stop. They'll find us. We have to keep moving." I saw a rest stop coming up ahead. It wasn't much, just a small parking area with a few picnic tables, but it was something. "I need to take a bathroom break," I lied. "Won't take more than a minute." Jack looked uncertain, but nodded. I eased the truck into the rest stop, my mind racing. I had to find a way to alert someone without setting him off. As I put the truck in park, Jack's agitation seemed to peak. "You're one of them, aren't you?" he accused, his voice trembling. "You're working for them." "Easy now," I said, holding up my hands. "I'm not working for anyone except myself and this trucking company. Why don't we both just take a deep breath?" But he wasn't listening anymore. His hand plunged into his pocket, and for one heart-stopping moment I thought he was going for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a crumpled piece of tin foil. "You can't fool me," he muttered, quickly fashioning the foil into a makeshift hat. "This'll block their mind control signals." If the situation wasn't so tense, I might have laughed. As it was, I saw an opportunity. "You're right," I said, thinking quickly. "In fact, I think I need one of those too. Mind if I borrow some of that foil?" He looked surprised, but handed over the roll of foil. As I pretended to make my own hat, I palmed my cell phone. It was an old flip phone. No internet, but it could still make calls. I just needed a moment alone to use it. "I'm going to step outside for a minute," I said, reaching for the door handle. "Need to stretch my legs. You stay here and keep an eye out, okay?" Jack nodded, his eyes darting nervously between me and the mirrors. I climbed down from the cab, my legs stiff from hours of driving. The rain had let up a bit, now just a light drizzle. I walked around to the back of the truck, out of Jack's line of sight, and quickly dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency?" I spoke in a low, urgent voice. "I'm a truck driver on Route 66, about 20 miles east of Amarillo. I've got the escaped psychiatric patient in my truck. We're at a rest stop. Please send help, but no sirens. He's unstable." The dispatcher assured me help was on the way and advised me to keep the patient calm and not to engage. Easy for her to say. I took a deep breath and walked back to the cab. Jack was right where I'd left him, but his agitation had clearly grown. "What took so long?" he demanded as I climbed back in. "Did you signal them?" "No signals," I said, holding up my hands. "It just needed some air." "Ready to hit the road again?" He nodded, but I could see the suspicion in his eyes. I started the engine, mind racing. The police were on their way, but I had no idea how long it would take them to get here. I needed to stall. "So, Jack," I said, pulling back onto the highway, "to tell me more about these signals. How'd you first discover them?" It was the right question to ask. Jack launched into a convoluted explanation involving secret government facilities, alien technology, and something about fluoride in the water. I nodded along, making sympathetic noises at the right moments, all the while watching the rearview mirror for any sign of flashing lights. We'd been driving for about 15 minutes when I saw them, a pair of headlights gaining on us fast. As they got closer, I could make out the outline of a police cruiser. My heart rate spiked. This was it. Jack saw them too. "No," he whispered, shrinking down in his seat. No, they found us. You led them to us." "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Everything's going to be okay. We're just going to pull over and talk to them. No one's going to hurt you." But Jack wasn't listening. He was in full panic mode now, eyes wild, breathing erratic. "I won't go back," he shouted. "I won't let them take me." Before I could react, he lunged for the steering wheel. We swerved violently, the truck fishtailing on the wet road. I fought for control, my heart pounding in my ears. For a terrifying moment, I thought we were going to roll. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it was over. Jack slumped back in his seat, the fight gone out of him. I managed to bring the truck to a stop on the shoulder, my hands shaking on the wheel. The police car pulled up behind us, lights flashing. 2 officers approached cautiously, hands on their holsters. I opened my door slowly, hands raised. "He's inside," I called out. I think he's given up." The next hour was a blur of statements and paperwork. Jack went quietly with the officers, head down, all the fire and paranoia seemingly drained out of him. As they loaded him into the back of the cruiser, he looked up at me one last time. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "And thank you for listening." I watched as they drove away, lights flashing in the pre-dawn gloom. A part of me felt guilty, like I'd betrayed his trust. But I knew I'd done the right thing. He needed help, real help, not a ride to Albuquerque. As I climbed back into my truck, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I was still wearing the tinfoil hat. Despite everything, I laughed. It had been one hell of a night. I crumpled up the foil and tossed it aside, then put the truck in gear. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. A new day. As I merged back onto the highway, I made a mental note. No more picking up hitchhikers. Some risks just aren't worth taking. But as the miles rolled by, I found myself hoping that wherever Jack ended up, he'd find some peace. We're all a little crazy in our own ways, after all. Some of us just hide it better than others. Story 10. The click of the bathroom stall lock echoed in the empty rest stop, a hollow sound that did nothing to ease the knot in my stomach. I'd been driving for hours, and the solitude of the open road had been a blessing. But now, in this deserted bathroom with its flickering fluorescent lights, that solitude felt more like a curse. I'd been on the road since dawn, making the long drive from Pittsburgh to Chicago for my best friend's wedding. It was supposed to be a happy trip, a chance to celebrate love and new beginnings. Instead, I found myself alone at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere, Ohio, at 2 a.m., trying to shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. The rest area had seemed abandoned when I pulled in, my headlights cutting through the fog that had rolled in an hour ago. No other cars in the lot, no lights on in the main building. But nature calls, and I didn't have much choice. So I'd made my way to the bathroom, my footsteps echoing on the cracked concrete. Now, as I sat in the stall, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of a leaky faucet. I tried to focus on the task at hand, to ignore the growing sense of unease that crept up my spine. That's when I heard it. The soft squeak of the main door opening. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It could be another traveler, I told myself, just someone else in need of a late-night pit stop. But the footsteps that followed didn't sound right. They were slow, deliberate, as if whoever had entered was taking care not to make noise. My heart began to race. I hadn't seen any other cars in the lot. Where had this person come from? The footsteps drew closer, echoing off the tiled walls. They paused, and I heard the squeak of someone leaning against one of the sinks. Were they waiting for me? I weighed my options. I could call out, pretend I hadn't noticed anything strange, but something told me that would be a mistake. Instead, I held my breath, trying to make as little noise as possible. The silence stretched on, broken only by the steady drip of the faucet. Then, almost imperceptibly, I saw a shadow move under the door of my stall. Someone was standing right outside. My pulse pounded in my ears. This wasn't right. No one would just stand there silent unless they had ill intentions. I needed to get out, to run, but I was trapped. The shadow shifted slightly. I could make out the outline of 2 feet pointed directly at my stall door. They weren't moving. I don't know how long we stayed like that, me frozen on the toilet, the stranger standing silently outside. It could have been minutes or hours. Every second felt like an eternity. Then, just as I thought I couldn't take the tension anymore, a voice broke the silence. Low, gravelly, unmistakably male. "I know you're in there." Ice flooded my veins. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen in real life, only in movies or true crime podcasts. But the menace in that voice was undeniable. "Come on out," the voice continued. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." My mind raced. I had my phone, but there was no signal. I'd checked when I first pulled into the rest stop. There was a window high up on the wall behind me, but it was small and barred. No escape there. The only way out was through the door. Through him. "I'm going to count to 3, the voice said. "Then I'm coming in." I looked around frantically, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. The toilet paper dispenser was sturdy metal, if I could wrench it free. 1. I grabbed the dispenser, pulling with all my strength. It didn't budge. 2. Panic rising, I fumbled in my purse, my keys, the pepper spray on my keychain. How could I have forgotten? 3. Before he could finish, I made my move. I flushed the toilet, hoping the noise would startle him, and burst out of the stall, pepper spray raised. But the bathroom was empty. I spun around, heart pounding. There was no one there. No sign that anyone had been there at all. Had I imagined it? Was the stress of the long drive playing tricks on my mind? I backed towards the main door, pepper spray still at the ready. As I reached for the handle, I caught a glimpse of movement in the mirror, a dark figure standing in the stall I had just vacated. I didn't stop to look closer. I ran. The fog had thickened while I was inside, turning the parking lot into a maze of swirling white. I sprinted towards where I thought I had parked, praying I was going in the right direction. Behind me, I heard the bathroom door slam open. Footsteps, heavy and fast, pounded after me. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys. As I wrenched the door open, a hand grabbed my shoulder. I screamed, whirling around with the pepper spray. "Whoa, easy there." The voice was different, younger, startled. As my eyes adjusted, I saw a man in his early 20s, hands raised in surrender. He was wearing a uniform with the rest area's logo. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to scare you. I'm the night attendant. I saw you running and thought something was wrong." I lowered the pepper spray, but didn't relax. "There was someone in the bathroom," I said, my voice shaking. "He was talking to me, threatening me." The attendant's brow furrowed. "That's impossible. I've been on duty all night. You're the first person I've seen come through here in hours." "But I heard him," I insisted. "I saw him in the mirror." He looked at me with a mixture of concern and skepticism. "Ma'am, why don't you come inside? We can call the police, have them check things out." I shook my head. No, I need to go." The thought of staying here a moment longer was unbearable. The attendant seemed about to argue, but then nodded. "All right, but please be careful driving. You seem pretty shaken up." I got into my car, locking the doors immediately. As I started the engine, the attendant knocked on my window. Hesitantly, I lowered it a crack. "Look," he said, his voice low. "I don't know what you think you saw or heard in there, but, well, you're not the first. We get stories sometimes from travelers about things that happen here late at night." A chill ran down my spine. What kind of things? He glanced around as if afraid of being overheard. Strange noises, voices, people seeing things that can't be there. Most folks write it off as tiredness or an overactive imagination, but what? I prompted. He sighed. This place has a history. Bad things have happened here, and sometimes I think maybe those things leave a mark. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. You're talking about ghosts? He shrugged. I'm just saying there's a reason I don't use that bathroom after dark, and why I'd advise you to find somewhere else to stop next time you're passing through. With that, he turned and walked back towards the main building, quickly swallowed by the fog. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all. The voice, the figure in the mirror, the attendant's warning. It was late, I was tired, my mind was playing tricks on me. But as I put the car in drive, I caught a glimpse of movement in my rearview mirror. For just a second, I saw a face, pale, gaunt, with eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. Then it was gone, leaving nothing but swirling fog behind me. I hit the gas, tires squealing as I peeled out of the parking lot. The rest area quickly disappeared from view, swallowed by the night and the fog. But even as the miles ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me from that place. Every shadow on the road seemed to move. Every reflective surface held the potential for that gaunt face to appear again. I drove through the night, sleep forgotten, fueled by adrenaline and fear. As dawn broke, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, I finally felt the tension start to leave my body. Whatever had happened back there, whether it was real, imagined, or something in between, it was behind me now. But as I merged onto the highway leading into Chicago, I made a silent vow. No more late-night stops at deserted rest areas, no more pushing myself to drive when I should rest. And most importantly, always trust that little voice of unease. Because sometimes that voice is the only warning we get that danger is lurking just around the corner or just on the other side of a bathroom stall door. Story 11. The ping of a new order usually meant nothing more than a quick delivery and a modest tip, but as I guided my motorcycle down the eerily quiet street, the beam of my headlight cutting through the fog, I realized this was no ordinary run. The figure standing motionless in the road ahead was about to turn my routine night into a waking nightmare. My name's Alex, and I've been a motorcycle food delivery driver for the past 2 years. It's not the career I dreamed of, but it pays the bills and gives me the freedom to pursue my passion for photography during the day. Most nights, it's a straightforward gig. Pick up the food, drop it off, rinse, and repeat. But this particular Thursday night in late autumn was anything but ordinary. The evening had started typically enough. I'd been cruising the city streets since 6 p.m., the familiar weight of my delivery backpack a constant companion. The orders had been steady but not overwhelming. A few pizzas here, some Chinese takeout there. Nothing out of the ordinary. It was nearing midnight when the app on my phone chimed, alerting me to a new order. I pulled over to the curb, killing the engine of my beat-up Kawasaki to check the details. The destination made me pause. It was for an address on the outskirts of town, an area I rarely ventured into due to its reputation for being, well, creepy. The delivery instructions were vague. Leave at the gate. No additional details, no contact number, just an address that, when I pulled it up on my GPS, seemed to be in the middle of nowhere. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the accept button. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to decline, to call it a night and head home. But the promise of a potentially hefty tip from a wealthy, out-of-the-way client was too tempting to resist. With a sigh, I tapped accept and kick-started my bike. The ride out of the city was uneventful, the streets growing quieter as I left the bustling downtown behind. But as I turned onto the road leading to my destination, an uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. The pavement gave way to gravel, then to dirt. The streetlights became fewer and farther between until they disappeared entirely, leaving me reliant on my headlight to navigate. A thick fog had rolled in, obscuring my vision and muffling the sound of my engine. I slowed down, squinting to make out the path ahead. The GPS on my phone insisted I was going the right way, but doubt gnawed at me. Who would live out here? And who would order delivery to such a remote location this late at night? As I rounded a bend, my headlight illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the road. I hit the brakes hard, my back tire fishtailing on the loose gravel. Heart pounding, I brought the bike to a stop just a few feet from the motionless silhouette. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the fog-muffled silence. "I've got a food delivery. Is this the right address?" The figure didn't respond, didn't move. Just stood there, a dark shape against the swirling mist. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "Look, if this is some kind of joke, it's not funny. I'm just trying to do my job here." Still no response. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the idle of my motorcycle engine and my own ragged breathing. Slowly, I reached into my pocket for my phone, intending to call the customer service line. That's when the figure finally moved. It took a step forward, then another. As it approached, details began to emerge from the fog. It was tall, unnaturally so, with limbs that seemed too long and too thin. Its face, when it finally came into view, was a blank mask. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, pale skin stretched over an elongated skull. I froze, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be a mask, a costume. Some sick prank being played on the delivery guy. But as the thing came closer, I knew with a bone-deep certainty that this was no prank. No human could move like that, with a jerky, marionette-like gait that defied the laws of physics. Panic surged through me. I dropped my phone, my fingers scrambling for the handlebars. I gunned the engine, spinning the bike around in a shower of gravel and dirt. As I sped away, I chanced to glance in my side mirror. The figure was gone. The road behind me was empty, swallowed up by the fog. I didn't slow down until I hit the city limits, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I pulled over at the first gas station I saw, killing the engine with shaking hands. As the adrenaline began to wear off, doubt crept in. Had I really seen what I thought I saw? The rational part of my brain tried to make sense of it. A trick of the light, an overactive imagination fueled by too many late nights in horror movies. But I couldn't shake the image of that blank face, those impossibly long limbs, the absolute wrongness of its movement. I pulled out my phone, intending to report the incident to the app's support team. But as I unlocked the screen, my blood ran cold. There in my list of active orders was nothing. The late-night delivery to the middle of nowhere had vanished as if it had never existed. With trembling fingers, I checked my GPS history. The address I'd been heading to wasn't there. According to my phone, I'd never left the city. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the implications. Either I was losing my mind or something truly inexplicable had happened out there in the fog. The next few days passed in a blur of sleepless nights and jumpy days. I couldn't bring myself to make any more deliveries, calling in sick to work and holing up in my apartment. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that featureless face, those impossibly long limbs reaching for me. I scoured the internet for answers, searching for any reports of similar encounters in the area. But all I found were vague urban legends and clearly fictional creepypastas. Nothing that matched the visceral terror of what I'd experienced. A week after the incident, I finally worked up the courage to return to work. The bills weren't going to pay themselves after all, and I'd convinced myself that it had all been some sort of stress-induced hallucination. But as I climbed onto my bike that first night back, a notification popped up on my phone. A new order to the same address as before. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a coincidence, a glitch in the system. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I declined the order, my finger jabbing the screen with more force than necessary. But as soon as I did, another popped up. Same address, same vague instructions. I turned off the app, my breathing ragged, but the notifications kept coming, bypassing the app entirely and popping up directly on my phone's home screen. Each one a silent demand, a summons back to that fog-shrouded road. In a panic, I threw my phone to the ground, watching as the screen shattered. The notifications stopped, but the damage was done. I knew then that this was far from over. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. The soft ping of a notification coming from my broken phone on the nightstand. With trembling hands, I reached for it. The screen was dark, the device clearly unusable, but as I watched, words began to appear, glowing softly in the darkness. "Your order is waiting. Please complete the delivery." I dropped the phone, scrambling out of bed and backing away, but I knew with a sickening certainty that it didn't matter how far I ran. Whatever I had encountered out there in the fog had found me, had marked me somehow. As I stood there in the darkness of my room, heart pounding and sweat beating on my forehead, I realized a terrifying truth. In the world of delivery driving, some orders are better left undelivered, and some customers, it seems, don't take kindly to being stood up. The soft ping of a notification echoed through the room once more, and I knew my long night was only just beginning. Story 12. I never thought I'd be afraid of my own rearview mirror. But after 8 hours on the road with the same headlights burning holes in my back, even the most mundane objects can become terrifying. It started as a typical road trip. I was driving from Chicago to Denver to visit my sister, a journey I'd made countless times before. The familiar stretch of I-80 stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the heartland. Cornfields and cow pastures blurred together as I cruised along, my trusty sedan humming contentedly. The first few hours were uneventful. I sang along to the radio, munched on gas station snacks, and watched the sun climb higher in the sky. It was just past noon when I first noticed the car behind me. There was nothing particularly remarkable about it. A nondescript silver sedan, probably a Toyota or a Honda. But as the miles ticked by, I realized it hadn't changed position. Always there, 3 or 4 car lengths back, steady as a shadow. At first, I didn't think much of it. Plenty of people drive long distances on the interstate. We were probably just going the same way. But as the hours wore on, a nagging feeling began to grow in the pit of my stomach. I switched lanes. The car followed. I sped up. It matched my pace. I slowed down. It stayed right there, never getting closer, never falling behind. Just there. By the time I crossed into Nebraska, my knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting the car to disappear, to prove that I was just being paranoid. But every time I looked, there it was. I tried to get a look at the driver, but the afternoon sun glared off the windshield, turning it into an impenetrable mirror. All I could see was a vague silhouette. Someone was definitely in there, but who? As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, I made a decision. I needed to know if this was really happening or if I was just letting my imagination run wild. At the next exit, I signaled and pulled off the highway. The silver car followed. My heart rate spiked as I navigated the off-ramp. This was no coincidence. Whoever was in that car was definitely following me. But why? I racked my brain, trying to think if I'd cut someone off or done something to provoke road rage. Nothing came to mind. The exit led to a small town, one of those places that seems to exist solely to provide gas and fast food to weary travelers. I pulled into a gas station, my hands shaking slightly as I turned off the engine. The silver car cruised past slowly, then made a U-turn at the end of the block. It came to a stop across the street, engine idling, waiting. I sat there for a moment, frozen with indecision. Should I call the police? But what would I say? "Hello, officer. A car has been driving behind me on a public road." It sounded ridiculous, even in my head. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car. My legs felt wobbly, like I'd been sitting for days instead of hours. I pretended to check my tires, all the while keeping an eye on the silver car. That's when I saw it. The driver's door opened and a figure stepped out. In the fading daylight, I could make out a man, tall and broad-shouldered. He started walking towards me with purposeful strides. Panic surged through me. I scrambled back into my car, fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life just as the man reached the edge of the gas station lot. Without thinking, I peeled out of there, tires squealing on the pavement. In my rearview mirror, I saw the man run back to his car. Within seconds, those familiar headlights were behind me again as I sped back towards the highway. My mind raced faster than my car. Who was this person? What did they want? The possibilities my brain conjured were terrifying. Kidnapper, serial killer, some deranged lunatic who picked victims at random on the highway. I merged back onto I-80, pushing my speed well above the limit. The silver car kept pace effortlessly. No matter how fast I went, those headlights remained a constant presence in my mirror. As full darkness fell, the highway became a tunnel of light, my world narrowing to the reach of my headlights and the glow of the car behind me. Every mile marker became a countdown, though to what, I wasn't sure. I thought about calling my sister, but what could she do from hundreds of miles away? Besides, I needed both hands on the wheel and all my concentration on the road. One mistake at these speeds could be fatal. Just past the Nebraska-Colorado border, I saw a sign for a rest area. On impulse, I took the exit. Maybe I thought I could lose them in the parking lot or at least find someone to help. The rest area was quiet, just a few semi-trucks in the far lot and a couple of RVs. I pulled into a spot near the brightly lit building, killing the engine. The silver car glided into the lot behind me, parking a few spaces away. My heart pounding, I got out of the car. My legs were stiff from hours of tense driving, but adrenaline coursed through me. I walked briskly towards the building, trying to look confident while keeping an eye on the silver car. The driver's door opened. The man got out. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the rest area, I could finally see him clearly. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his early 30s. He wore jeans and a plain t-shirt, looking utterly ordinary except for the intense look on his face. He started walking towards me. I quickened my pace, reaching for the door handle of the rest area building. Just as my fingers touched the cool metal, I heard his voice. "Wait, please, I just need to talk to you." Something in his tone made me pause. He didn't sound threatening, he sounded desperate. I turned slowly, my hand still on the door handle, ready to bolt inside if needed. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Why have you been following me?" He held up his hands, palms out, a universal gesture of peace. "My name is David. I'm so sorry for scaring you. I've been trying to catch up to you for hours." "Catch up to me?" I repeated, confusion mixing with my fear. "Why?" David reached into his back pocket. I tensed, but he pulled out only a wallet. From it, he extracted a small white card and held it out to me. Even from a few feet away, I could see what it was. A business card for a local bank in Chicago. "You dropped this," he said. "At the gas station just outside of Chicago. I tried to catch you before you left, but you were already pulling out. I thought I could catch up and return it at the next rest stop, but you just kept going." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "All this? For a business card? Why didn't you just—" "I don't know, let it go," I asked. David shrugged, looking a bit embarrassed. "I know it sounds crazy, but my dad always taught me to do the right thing, no matter how small. And well, I was heading to Denver anyway. I figured it couldn't hurt to try and return it." I took the card from him, noticing for the first time how my hand was shaking. It was indeed my bank card, complete with my name and account details. I vaguely remembered stopping for gas just outside of Chicago, fumbling with my wallet as I paid. "I'm so sorry for scaring you," David said again. I realized about an hour in that this probably looked really creepy, but by then I didn't know how to approach you without making it worse. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, bordering on hysterical. All that fear, all that panic over a simple act of kindness. I didn't know whether to thank him or yell at him. "You could have flashed your lights," I said weakly. "Or honked or something." David ran a hand through his hair, looking sheepish. "Yeah, I didn't think of that, not my brightest moment." We stood there for a moment, the absurdity of the situation hanging in the air between us. Then, almost in unison, we both started laughing. It was the kind of laughter born of relief and released tension, slightly manic but cathartic. As our laughter died down, I felt the last of my fear melt away. "I don't suppose you'd like to grab a coffee?" I asked, gesturing towards the vending machines inside. "After all that, I could use some caffeine, and maybe you can tell me about this very important drive to Denver." David smiled, the tension visibly leaving his shoulders. "I'd like that," he said. As we walked into the rest area, I couldn't help but shake my head at the strange turns life can take. What had started as a terrifying ordeal had somehow turned into, well, I wasn't sure what yet, but I was curious to find out. We got our coffees and sat at one of the plastic tables. David turned out to be a software engineer moving to Denver for a new job. We swapped stories about Chicago, compared notes on the best route to Denver, and laughed about the absurdity of our highway chase. By the time we got back on the road, the silver car behind me no longer seemed menacing. Instead, it was oddly comforting, like having a travel buddy for the long night drive ahead. As I watched the miles tick by, I thought about how quickly fear can take hold, how easily we can misinterpret the actions of others. But I also thought about the unexpected kindness of strangers, and how sometimes the things we run from turn out to be the very things we need. The rest of the drive to Denver passed in a blur of highway lights and easy conversation over the car radio. When we finally pulled into my sister's driveway, I found myself oddly reluctant to say goodbye to my unintentional road trip companion. "Thanks for the card," I said as we stood by our cars. "And for the most interesting drive I've ever had," David grinned. "Thanks for not calling the cops on me, and for the coffee." We exchanged numbers, promising to meet up once he got settled in Denver. As I watched his silver car disappear down the street, I couldn't help but smile. It had been a long, strange trip, but somehow I felt I'd arrived at exactly the right destination. Story 13. The flash of red and blue lights in my rearview mirror sent a jolt of panic through my chest. I eased my foot off the gas pedal, watching as the patrol car closed the distance between us. It was just past midnight on a lonely stretch of highway, and I knew I hadn't been speeding. So why was I being pulled over? I guided my car onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires as I came to a stop. The patrol car pulled up behind me, its headlights flooding my mirrors with blinding light. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. Just a routine stop, I told myself, nothing to worry about. But as I watched the officer approach in my side mirror, a sense of unease crept over me. Something about his gait seemed off, too stiff, too deliberate. I rolled down my window, the cool night air rushing in, carrying with it the scent of diesel and freshly cut grass. "License and registration, please," the officer said, his voice flat and emotionless. I couldn't make out his face in the darkness, just the outline of his hat and the glint of his badge. "Of course, officer," I replied, reaching for my wallet. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over? I don't think I was speeding." He didn't respond immediately, and I felt the weight of his gaze as I handed over my documents. When he finally spoke, his voice sent a chill down my spine. "Where are you headed tonight?" It was a simple question, but something in his tone made it feel like an accusation. I swallowed hard, suddenly very aware of how isolated we were on this dark stretch of road. "I'm on my way to my sister's place," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She just had a baby, and I'm bringing some gifts." The officer was silent for a moment, studying my license. "Long drive this late at night," he said finally. "You seem nervous. Any particular reason for that?" I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my palms beginning to sweat. "No, sir. I guess I'm just tired. It's been a long day." He leaned in closer, and I caught a whiff of something metallic and unpleasant on his breath. "Mind if I take a look in your trunk?" My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't normal procedure for a routine traffic stop. "I'm sorry, officer, but I don't consent to any searches. If I'm not being detained, I'd like to continue on my way." The officer's posture stiffened, and I saw his hand move to rest on his holster. "Step out of the car, please." Fear coursed through me, but I knew my rights. "Am I being arrested? If not, I don't have to exit my vehicle." His response was immediate and chilling. "You can step out voluntarily, or I can remove you from the vehicle. Your choice." My mind raced. This was all wrong. I thought about making a run for it, but where would I go? We were miles from anywhere, and he had a car and a gun. Slowly, my hands shaking, I opened the door and stepped out. The officer towered over me, his face still obscured by the shadow of his hat. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle." I complied, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I felt his hands pat me down roughly, lingering in places they shouldn't. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but fear kept me frozen in place. "What's in the trunk?" he demanded again. "Just some baby clothes and toys," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "For my nephew, I told you my sister just had a baby." He was silent for a moment, and I heard the crackle of a radio. Was he calling for backup? But then I realized the sound wasn't coming from him. It was coming from the patrol car. "Unit 17, respond to a 1050 on Highway 9, mile marker 127, over." The voice on the radio was clear, professional, nothing like the man standing behind me. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what that meant. This wasn't a real officer. In that moment of realization, survival instinct took over. I spun around, catching him off guard, and drove my knee up hard. He grunted in pain, doubling over, and I took the opportunity to run. I sprinted down the highway, the sound of my pounding feet echoing in the night. Behind me, I heard a roar of anger and the sound of pursuit. I didn't dare look back, focusing all my energy on putting as much distance between us as possible. Headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter as they approached. I waved my arms frantically, praying they would stop. The car slowed, and I nearly cried with relief when I saw it was a real patrol car. The officer inside looked startled as I ran up, gasping for breath. "Please," I panted. "You have to help me. There's a man back there. He's impersonating an officer. He tried to—" My words were cut off by the screech of tires. The fake patrol car was speeding away, its tail lights quickly swallowed by the darkness. The real officer was out of his car in an instant, his hand on his weapon. "Are you all right? Are you hurt?" I shook my head, the adrenaline starting to wear off, leaving me shaky and nauseous. "No, I don't think so. He didn't. I got away." The officer's partner was already on the radio, calling in the incident and requesting backup. As they took my statement, the full impact of what had almost happened hit me. I sank to the ground, my legs no longer able to support me. The next few hours passed in a blur. More officers arrived, taking photos of the tire tracks left by the impersonator's car, dusting my vehicle for prints. I answered their questions as best I could, trying to remember every detail of the man who had pulled me over. As dawn broke, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, a detective approached me. Her face was grim as she sat down next to me on the hood of my car. "I'm afraid I have some bad news," she said softly. "You're not the first victim we've had report an incident like this. There have been 3 other women in the past month who were pulled over by someone impersonating an officer. They weren't as lucky as you." I felt the blood drain from my face as the implications of her words sank in. "You mean?" She nodded, her eyes full of sympathy. "We found their bodies dumped in a ravine about 10 miles from here. We've been trying to keep it out of the media to avoid causing panic, but, well, you have a right to know what you escaped from." I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what she was telling me. The detective continued, her voice gentle but firm. "You did everything right. You trusted your instincts, you knew your rights, and when the moment came, you fought back. You saved your own life tonight." Tears welled up in my eyes, a mix of relief and delayed terror. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Now we catch this bastard," she said, a note of determination in her voice. "Your description matches what our other witnesses reported. With the evidence we've gathered here, we're closer than ever to identifying him." She handed me her card. "We'll need you to come down to the station later to give a full statement and work with a sketch artist. But for now, is there someone who can come pick you up? You shouldn't be driving after what you've been through." I nodded, thinking of my sister. She'd be worried sick by now. I was hours late, but she'd understand. She'd be there for me, just like always. As I waited for my sister to arrive, I watched the sun rise fully over the highway. The scene looked so normal now, just an ordinary stretch of road bathed in the golden light of morning. But I knew I'd never see it the same way again. I thought about all the solo road trips I'd taken over the years, all the times I'd driven late at night without a second thought. The world felt different now, more dangerous. But I was alive. I had survived. And in that survival, I found a strength I didn't know I possessed. The detective's words echoed in my mind. "You saved your own life tonight." As I saw my sister's car approaching in the distance, I made a silent vow. I wouldn't let fear rule my life, but I would never ignore my instincts again. And maybe, just maybe, by sharing my story, I could help save someone else. The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the horizon. It was the same road it had always been, but I was changed, stronger, wiser, and above all, grateful for the second chance I'd been given. Story 14. The moment I saw the knife glint in the sunlight, I knew this delivery run was about to become a race for my life. One second I was a simple bicycle courier weaving through midday traffic. The next I was an unwitting witness to a crime that would turn the bustling city streets into a labyrinth of danger. My name's Zoe, and I've been working as a bicycle courier in the heart of downtown for the past 3 years. It's a job that requires quick thinking, quicker reflexes, and an intimate knowledge of every shortcut and back alley in the city. Little did I know that on that sweltering Tuesday afternoon in July, those skills would be put to the ultimate test. The day had started like any other. I'd strapped on my helmet, shouldered my messenger bag, and hit the streets just as the morning rush was dying down. The first few hours were routine, dropping off packages, picking up envelopes, navigating the ever-present maze of construction zones and taxi-clogged intersections. It was just past noon when I got the call for a delivery to the financial district. As I pedaled down Main Street, the towering skyscrapers casting long shadows across the pavement, I spotted a commotion up ahead. A crowd had gathered outside one of the banks, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. Instinct told me to steer clear, to find another route, but as I started to veer onto a side street, a flash of movement caught my eye. A man burst out of the bank's revolving doors, his face hidden beneath a dark baseball cap. In his hand, unmistakable even from a distance, was a knife, its blade catching the midday sun. Time seemed to slow down. I watched, frozen in place, straddling my bike as the man collided with a woman exiting the bank. She fell, scattering papers across the sidewalk. The man stumbled but kept running, shoving his way through the gathering crowd. That's when he looked up, his eyes locking with mine. In that split second, I saw the panic in his gaze, the desperation, and I knew with absolute certainty that he had seen me see him. The spell broke. I pushed off hard, my legs pumping as I sped away from the scene. Behind me, I could hear shouts, the sound of running footsteps. A quick glance over my shoulder confirmed my worst fear. The man was giving chase, barreling down the sidewalk with single-minded determination. My mind raced faster than my bike. I needed to lose him, to find a cop, to do something. But years of navigating these streets told me that the nearest police station was at least 10 blocks away. I couldn't outrun him for that long, not with the midday traffic slowing me down. I cut across lanes, ignoring the blaring horns and angry shouts from drivers. My pursuer was keeping pace, his longer stride making up for my agility on the bike. Another glance back showed he had ditched the knife. Small comfort given the murderous look in his eyes. As I approached an intersection, a fresh wave of panic washed over me. The light had just turned red, and a steady stream of cars was already moving across my path. In a split-second decision, I veered right, jumping the curb and nearly colliding with a hot dog vendor. "Sorry!" I yelled, not daring to look back as I heard the clatter of the cart being knocked over. The vendor's curses faded quickly as I sped down the narrow side street, weaving between parked cars and dumpsters. My legs were burning, lungs screaming for air, but I couldn't slow down. I could still hear footsteps behind me, closer now in the confined space of the alley. I needed a plan, fast. As I emerged onto another main street, a crazy idea struck me. Without hesitating, I swerved into oncoming traffic. Horns blared and tires screeched as I zigzagged between cars, my heart in my throat. It was insane, dangerous, and exactly what I needed to gain some distance. I chanced another look back as I mounted the opposite curb. The man was still there, but he'd been forced to wait for a break in traffic. I'd bought myself maybe 30 seconds, a minute at most. My mind raced, trying to figure out my next move. That's when I spotted it. A construction site up ahead, its scaffolding a tangled web of metal poles and wooden planks. Without a second thought, I aimed straight for it. Dropping my bike at the entrance, I scrambled onto the lowest level of scaffolding. My muscles protested as I hauled myself up, the metal hot to the touch under the midday sun. Below, I heard a crash and a curse. My pursuer had reached the site. I climbed higher, my courier bag slapping against my back with each movement. The construction workers shouted in alarm, but I ignored them, focused solely on putting as much distance as possible between myself and the ground. When I finally paused to catch my breath, I was near the top of the scaffolding, a good 6 stories up. The city stretched out around me, a maze of concrete and glass. And there on the street below was my pursuer. He was arguing with the construction foreman, gesticulating wildly in my direction. For a moment, I thought it was over. Surely he wouldn't be crazy enough to follow me up here, but as I watched, he shoved past the foreman and grabbed onto the scaffolding. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, my brief respite cut short. I looked around frantically, searching for an escape route. The building the scaffolding was attached to was still under construction, its windows dark holes in a facade of bare concrete. To my left, another finished building stood tantalizingly close, its fire escape just out of reach. The sound of metal creaking below spurred me into action. I began to edge along the scaffolding, moving parallel to the unfinished building. My palms were slick with sweat, every gust of wind threatening to throw me off balance. I tried not to think about the drop, about how one wrong move could send me plummeting to the street below. Instead, I focused on my goal, the fire escape of the adjacent building, drawing closer with each careful step. The gap between the scaffolding and the fire escape was wider than it had looked from a distance. As I reached the edge, I realized with a sinking feeling that I'd have to jump. Behind me, I could hear my pursuer getting closer, his labored breathing carrying up through the metal framework. It was now or never. Taking a deep breath, I backed up a few steps. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I ran forward and leapt. For a heart-stopping moment, I was airborne, the busy street dizzyingly far below. Then my hand slammed into the railing of the fire escape, the impact jarring every bone in my body. I scrambled to pull myself up, my feet kicking at empty air. Just as I managed to haul myself over the railing, I heard a shout of frustration. My pursuer had reached the edge of the scaffolding, but the jump was too far for him to attempt. I allowed myself a moment of relief before starting down the fire escape as fast as I dared. By the time I reached the ground, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the spectacle above. In the distance, I could hear police sirens approaching. As an officer approached me, notepad in hand, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. My legs felt like jelly, my hands raw and scraped from the climb. But I was alive, and the adrenaline coursing through my veins made me feel more alive than I had in years. Over the next few hours, I recounted my story multiple times, to the police, to my boss, to wide-eyed co-workers who had heard snippets of the chase over the Courier radio network. The man, it turned out, had attempted to rob the bank but panicked when the silent alarm was triggered. He was apprehended trying to climb down from the scaffolding. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the now quiet street, I finally headed home. My bike, miraculously undamaged, had been recovered by a fellow courier. As I pedaled through the familiar streets, every sense felt heightened. The city that had been my workplace for years now seemed different, charged with potential energy, both dangerous and exhilarating. I knew that tomorrow I'd be back out here delivering packages and dodging traffic, but something had changed. I'd always prided myself on knowing every inch of this city, on being able to navigate its currents like a fish in water. Now I realized I'd only been skimming the surface. There were depths to these streets I'd never imagined, currents running below the everyday hustle and bustle that could sweep you away in an instant. As I turned onto my street, a thought struck me that made me laugh out loud. In all the chaos, I'd never completed my delivery to the financial district. Well, I mused, unlocking my apartment door, there's always tomorrow, and who knows what adventures it might bring. Story 15. The moment I flicked on my cruiser's lights, I knew this wouldn't be a routine traffic stop. Call it a cop's intuition or just years on the force, but something in my gut screamed that this night was about to take a turn. It was a quiet Tuesday evening, the kind that usually drags on forever during a night shift. I'd been parked in my usual spot, a secluded turnout on Highway 27, more to stay awake than to actually catch speeders. The coffee in my thermos had long since gone cold, and I was seriously considering calling it a night when I saw the car. It was an older model sedan, probably from the early 2000s, with a busted taillight. Normally, I'd let something like that slide, give the driver a friendly warning, and send them on their way. But there was something off about the way the car was moving, weaving ever so slightly between the lines. Drunk driver? Maybe. But my instincts told me it was something else. I pulled out behind the sedan, flipping on my lights. The car didn't react immediately, continuing to drift along for another quarter mile before finally pulling over to the shoulder. Red flag number 1. As I approached the vehicle, I ran through my usual mental checklist. Hand on my holster, flashlight ready, eyes scanning for any sudden movements. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside clearly. Another red flag. I tapped on the driver's side window with my flashlight. "License and registration, please." The window rolled down slowly, revealing a man in his mid-30s. He was sweating profusely despite the cool night air, his eyes darting nervously between me and the rearview mirror. "Evening, officer," he said, his voice shaky. "Was I speeding?" I shook my head. "Busted taillight. Mind if I see your license and registration?" He nodded too quickly, fumbling with his wallet. As he handed over his license, I noticed his hands were trembling. Could be nerves. Some people just get anxious around cops. But combined with everything else, it set off alarm bells in my head. I glanced at the license. "Everything all right tonight, Mr. Johnson?" He nodded again, that same too quick motion. "Yes, sir, just heading home from work. Long day, you know how it is." I did know how it was. I also knew that most people coming home from work didn't look like they were about to jump out of their skin. "Mind if I take a look in your vehicle, Mr. Johnson?" His eyes widened slightly. Do you need to? I mean, it's just a taillight, right?" I kept my voice calm and level. "Just a routine check, sir. Won't take but a minute." Johnson's hand twitched towards the center console, then back to the steering wheel. It was subtle, but I caught it. My heart rate picked up a notch. "Step out of the vehicle, please, Mr. Johnson." He hesitated, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror again. "Officer, I don't think that's necessary. Can't you just write me a fix-it ticket and let me go? My wife's expecting me." I took a small step back, my hand moving closer to my holster. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time. Please step out of the vehicle." For a moment I thought he might comply. Then I saw his hand dart towards the console again, this time with purpose. "Hands where I can see them," I shouted, drawing my weapon. "Do it now." Time seemed to slow down. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Johnson froze, his hand hovering over the console. "Don't do it," I said, my voice low and steady despite the tension thrumming through me. "Whatever you're thinking, it's not worth it. Just put your hands on the wheel and we can talk this through." Johnson's shoulders slumped. For a second, I thought the crisis had passed. Then in one fluid motion, he threw open the car door and bolted. "Stop! Police!" I yelled, more out of reflex than any expectation he'd actually listen. I took off after him, grateful for all those hours at the gym. Johnson was quick, but fear and adrenaline can only carry you so far. I was gaining on him with every stride. As we neared the tree line at the edge of the highway, I saw Johnson reach into his jacket. My training kicked in automatically. I tackled him hard, sending us both sprawling onto the grassy embankment. We grappled for a moment, Johnson thrashing wildly beneath me. I managed to pin one of his arms, but his other hand was still fumbling inside his jacket. "Stop resisting," I growled, trying to get control of his free arm. That's when I felt it, the unmistakable shape of a gun beneath his jacket. My blood ran cold. This had just gone from bad to potentially lethal in the blink of an eye. I threw my full weight onto Johnson's arm, pinning it to the ground. With my free hand, I reached for my cuffs. "Don't move," I said, my voice deadly serious. "You're under arrest." As I snapped the cuffs onto his wrists, I felt Johnson go limp beneath me. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by something that sounded almost like relief. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, his face pressed into the grass. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know what else to do." Keeping one hand on Johnson, I reached into his jacket and carefully removed the gun. As I did, something else fell out, a small bag filled with white powder. The pieces started to fall into place. "How long?" I asked, not needing to specify what I meant. Johnson let out a shuddering breath. 6 months. Started with pills after a back injury, when those ran out. He trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. I radioed for backup, keeping a watchful eye on Johnson as we waited. He didn't try to run again, just lay there on the ground, occasionally muttering apologies. As the wail of approaching sirens filled the air, I found myself thinking about how quickly things can spiral out of control. One minute you're doing a routine traffic stop, the next you're in a life-or-death struggle. But it wasn't just me. Johnson's life had spiraled too, from injury to addiction to this moment on the side of a highway. The backup units arrived, and I handed Johnson over to be processed. As they put him in the back of a cruiser, he looked at me one last time. "What's going to happen to me?" he asked, his voice small and scared. I sighed, suddenly feeling the weight of the night's events. "You're looking at some serious charges," I said honestly. "But there are programs, ways to get help. It's not too late to turn things around." He nodded slowly, a glimmer of something like hope in his eyes before the cruiser door closed. As I walked back to my own vehicle, I couldn't shake the feeling of how close we'd come to a much worse outcome. If Johnson had pulled that gun, if I'd been a second slower, The what-ifs were enough to make your head spin. I sat in my cruiser for a long moment, letting the adrenaline fade. My hands were shaking slightly as I picked up my radio to call in the end of my shift. I knew I'd have hours of paperwork ahead of me, statements to file, evidence to log. But right now, all I wanted was to go home, hug my wife, and be grateful for another night where everyone made it home alive. As I pulled away from the scene, lights still flashing in my rearview mirror, I thought about Johnson. I hoped he'd meant it when he said he was sorry, that he'd take this as the wake-up call he clearly needed. In this job, you see a lot of people at their worst moments. Sometimes those moments become turning points. Other times, they're just another step down a dark path. The highway stretched out before me, empty and dark. In a few hours, it would be filled with morning commuters, people going about their daily lives, unaware of the drama that had unfolded here. That's the thing about being a cop. You see a whole other side of the world, the things that happen in the shadows while most people sleep. As I neared the station, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the long night ahead. There would be questions to answer, reports to file, a story to tell over and over again, but that was the job. You never know what a simple traffic stop might turn into, but you do it anyway, because sometimes, just sometimes, you might be the one to make a difference. I pulled into the station parking lot, the events of the night replaying in my mind. Another shift over, another story to tell, but more importantly, another night where I got to make it home. In this line of work, sometimes that's the best you can hope for. And tonight, that was enough.